Hey, this is John with John's Pool Service. Today we're going to be making a video about closing a pool. Sometimes you'll have different size pools. Some have main drains, some have 2 skimmers, some have 1, different outlets. You have step jets, return jets, cleaner jets. So it's not a one-all catch-all kind of thing, but it'll give you an idea of what you need to do to make sure everything is covered. It's always good to have a place that you want to store all your pool supplies. 1 or 2, you know, however much stuff you have. But like in this case, we have a big box here. We store the cover in it. We store all the gizmos and the water savers and all the equipment, so that, you know, when you open the pool, you know, you put them in here. When you close the pool, you put them in the same place. So right now what he's doing is he's putting what they call water savers on. And what that does is that enables us to make sure all the water is blown out of the return lines without necessarily having to lower the water level down below the returns. In some pools you have water features like these jets right here, but one thing to keep in mind, the openings, if you see this opening at the top right here, sometimes you have plugs to put on there, and if you happen to have those, that's great. If you lose them, you want to make sure that you put some duct tape or find a plug or something and plug that up. If you have a mesh cover in particular, even though you have these covered, the water's still going to wash through the mesh and get in these holes. When you're lowering the water level down or preparing to close the pool, one thing to keep in mind is how much water do you want to have to take out of your pool. A lot of that is going to depend on what kind of cover you have. We always, if it's a solid cover with no drains in it, we'll lower the water level down to just at the bottom of the skimmer. If it's a mesh cover, you need to bring it down a little bit more, because the rains are going to wash into the pool and it's going to, you know, fill the pool back up. So you have to keep that in mind. One thing that we do is right now when we have the pump running, we're lowering the water level down. When it gets down below the skimmer, we want to suck all the water out of the skimmer, so when we put the gizmos and things on, there's not a lot of water in there. So how we do that, the pump is running, always leave a valve open so you have water flow. All right, but in this case, this is the skimmer valve, which is closed. All right, so what we'll do is we'll pop this open, and you'll see the water die down there, and then close it back. And you're still drawing water from this side. All right, the theory is we want to get all the water out of the skimmer line so we can put the gizmos in. And what you're going to see when you do that is we already put the gizmo in here, but you can see down in there there's no water in here. That way, when we put the gizmos in, you know, we can make sure it's not leaking and there's no issues there. To make sure there's a seal at the bottom, you know, to prevent any winter damage. One thing to notice all the time, but particularly when you're closing it, is what kind of condition is your liner in. Like in this particular case, you see a little bit of fading over there, which is not really a bad thing. It's just fading. Just says it has a few years on it. The big question is, when do I replace my liner? Okay, you don't necessarily want to replace the liner because of fading, unless you just don't like the fading. That doesn't change the fact that the liner is still watertight. It's just an aesthetic, you know, thing that you have to live with or not. One key thing to think about is, you know, am I patching my liner once or twice a season? You know, things like that. You know, how old is my liner? Normally, the way the liners make, the average liner you're probably going to get 5 to 7 years out of. So if you're hitting the 5 to 7 year mark, take a real close look at your liner. The best time to replace it is in the spring. That way they can get in there as soon as it's warm enough, but before it's so warm you can't swim, get the liner replaced. It's fresh, it's new for the season. We got the water level down the way we want it. We have a winterizing kit that we put in here. It's a stain and scale inhibitor, a pH buffer, and some non-chlorine shock, basically, and some algicide. That's what it consists of. Now with mesh covers, you're not always with mesh covers are good. It's a good safety cover, but the problem with mesh covers is the sunlight burns through, unless you get a sunblock mesh, the sunlight burns through the mesh, burns the chemicals out of the water, so you wind up, your pool's green. But you still want to put something in it, whether you have a mesh or not, to inhibit that as much as possible. All right, so we got the chemicals in the pool that we're going to put in for winterizing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to blow air backwards throughout all the lines to try to get all the water out of it. All right, so first we're going to do the main drain. It's going to get kind of noisy. And if you look down that way, give it a second. That's the air coming backwards through the line. So the air is pushing all the water down below the freeze line in the pipes underground. So we're going to let that run for a second just to get, you know, as much water pushed down below the freeze line as possible. And then what he's going to do at the filter pad is he's going to shut the main drain valve off to lock the air in the pipes to hold the water down. Go ahead. So now we're doing the skimmer. The same basic process. We're just blowing air through the lines backwards to make sure we get all the air out of the line. Again, this is not the only way to close the pool. That's the way we found most effective. So we got the skimmer done. We got the main drain done. Now we're working on the return lines to make sure, the same process, to make sure all the water is blowing out of the lines, to make sure there's no, make sure it's protected for the winter. All right, so we got all the lines blown out. So now another important thing to do at your filter pad area is to make sure all the drain plugs are out. Okay, so again, some people have sand filters, some people have cartridge filters, some people have one pump, some people have two pumps, some people have some intricate plumbing going to different water features, some are more simplified. Okay, some have salt cells, some don't. Some have automatic chlorinators, inline, offline. There's a lot of options here. Okay, but the key thing to remember is whatever your setup is, all right, make sure all the drain plugs are out of line, so that any water, any residual water that is in it can be out. Like for instance, there's a plug in the front here that's already been removed. There's one on the side right here. All right, and you can see when I take this out, watch this. See how just a little bit of water is still in that impeller area on the bottom. The water that we pushed through there kind of went around it, okay? So these plugs are designed at the lowest part of the pump, filter, whatever you're taking a plug out of, to get all the residual water out of what you're taking it out of, whether it be a pump, filter, inline chlorinator, whatever. All right, so make sure all the water's out of here. And take all your plugs out.